I was 32 when I realized that being the good son in my family didn't mean anything unless you were the favorite. My name's Peter, and for most of my life, I thought if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed out of drama, my parents would eventually see me the way they saw my sister, Chloe. I was wrong. They didn't just prefer her, they worshipped her. She could set fire to the living room, and they'd say, "She's just creative." I once broke a plate, and Mom said it symbolized my lack of focus. That pretty much sums up the dynamic. Growing up, Chloe was the golden child, the miracle daughter after years of trying. I was the unplanned follow-up, the quiet kid who built Lego sets alone while she performed cartwheels for applause. She got ballet lessons, summer camps, private tutors, a car for her 17th birthday. I got hand-me-downs, half apologies, and a lecture about how gratitude builds character. Dad used to tell people that Chloe would make something of herself and that I liked to tinker. When I got a scholarship to study mechanical engineering, he told me not to get cocky because everyone gets lucky once. After college, I worked my way up at a manufacturing firm. Nothing glamorous, but honest work. Chloe, meanwhile, burned through jobs like matches. She went from art school dropout to wellness influencer to spiritual consultant, whatever that means. My parents always bailed her out, always believed her next venture was the one. They even remortgaged their house once to fund her eco-friendly candle business. Those candles ended up in their basement, collecting dust next to boxes of unpaid invoices. Despite it all, I visited often. I'd fix Dad's car, mow the lawn, replace their old water heater, stuff Chloe wasn't built for. Every time, Mom would brag about Chloe's latest achievement, like her 12,000 Instagram followers, then look at me and ask if I'd met anyone serious yet. The truth was, I didn't bring anyone home because my last girlfriend had overheard Mom calling her another charity project. I just stopped trying. Then Grandpa passed away. He was the only one who ever treated me like an equal. He'd been quiet and sharp, a man of few words but deep eyes. He was Dad's father, and the two of them never got along. Grandpa thought Dad had gone soft after marrying Mom, said she ran the house like a CEO. I spent most summers at Grandpa's place as a kid, helping him repair tractors, fix fences, and build furniture in his barn workshop. When I was little, he'd say, "You've got the patience of a craftsman, Pete." That's rare. I didn't realize how much that meant until much later. The funeral was strange. Small, efficient, and cold, just like Dad wanted. He didn't want a show. Chloe showed up 2 hours late, wearing sunglasses and holding an iced coffee, claiming she had a migraine from crying. I barely recognized her. Designer coat, long fake nails, the kind of detached confidence that comes from never facing consequences. She hugged me briefly, whispered, "Let's just get this over with," and spent the rest of the service scrolling on her phone. After the burial, the lawyer handling Grandpa's estate called to schedule the will reading. He said Grandpa had left behind a few specific requests, including a sealed letter to be opened in front of the family. Mom rolled her eyes when she heard that. "Always the dramatics," she muttered. But I felt something twist in my gut, a mix of grief and curiosity. Grandpa wasn't the type to waste words. If he'd written a letter, it meant something. The day of the will reading, we met in the lawyer's office downtown. The place smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Mom was dressed like she was attending a gala. Pearl earrings, expensive perfume, that icy smile she saved for public appearances. Dad had his arms crossed, impatient as ever. Chloe looked bored, clicking her nails on the table, sipping a latte she'd smuggled in. The lawyer, a calm man named Mr. Henderson, sat across from us, adjusting his glasses. He gave a polite smile and opened a leather folder. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, your father left behind a detailed will and an accompanying letter." Mom waved her hand. "Let's just get to it. I assume the estate will go to us, as usual." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Well, there are specific allocations." He paused, reading. "To his daughter-in-law, Margaret, that's Mom, he leaves the antique china set and the family piano." Mom smiled, though her eyes flickered briefly with disappointment. "To his son, Robert, Dad, he leaves his coin collection, valued at approximately $60,000, and his vintage pickup truck." Dad grunted approval, nodding slightly. Then Henderson looked up at Chloe, who was already fixing her hair in her reflection. "To his granddaughter, Chloe, He leaves the remainder of his liquid assets, totaling $6.7 million. Chloe gasped. Wait, what? She turned to Mom, who beamed like she'd just won an award. See, sweetheart, Grandpa knew your worth, she whispered. I stayed quiet, my hands folded, waiting for my name. And to his grandson, Peter, Henderson paused. I'll never forget the pause. It was long enough for Mom to smirk and for Dad to mutter, "Here we go." Henderson continued. He leaves $1. The room went still. Dad let out a laugh, sharp, condescending. Guess someone needed a lesson in humility, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Mom added, maybe now you'll learn some responsibility, Peter. You were always the disappointment anyway. Chloe just smiled, that smug little tilt of her head. Don't take it personally, Pete. It's not your fault he liked me more. I didn't say anything. My throat felt tight. It wasn't even about the money. It was the message. $1. Like I was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Henderson adjusted his glasses again, but he didn't close the folder. There is one more item, he said carefully. A sealed letter your grandfather instructed me to read aloud, only after the will had been fully disclosed. Mom frowned. What for? He already made it clear. But Henderson ignored her and opened the envelope. The paper inside was old and slightly yellowed, Grandpa's neat handwriting covering both sides. He began to read. Robert, Margaret, and my grandchildren. If you're hearing this, I'm gone, and hopefully somewhere quieter than that house of yours. Henderson hesitated briefly, then continued. I've lived long enough to see who each of you really are. Robert, you've spent your life trying to please your wife and outdo your neighbors. You forgot what it meant to work for something, to build with your hands, to teach your children by example instead of by lecture. Margaret, you've poisoned every relationship around you with your pride. You turned love into a competition and my son into a stranger. Mom stiffened. This is ridiculous, she said. But Henderson went on. As for Chloe, I hope the money brings you happiness, because nothing else ever will if you don't learn what honesty means. You have your mother's charm and your father's carelessness, a dangerous mix. Chloe scoffed. He's just bitter. And Peter, Henderson read, his voice softening. If you're sitting there quietly, don't. You have the kindest heart of all of them, and that's why they've treated you the way they have. They mistake goodness for weakness. But I haven't forgotten what you've done for me. The summers fixing fences, the times you came without being asked, the respect you showed without expecting a thing in return. I once told you patience is a craftsman's virtue. Now you'll see why. Henderson stopped reading for a moment, looked at me, and said, There's a postscript addressed only to you, Peter. He asked that I hand it to you personally after this reading. Mom's face twitched. What's that supposed to mean? Henderson didn't answer. He handed me a smaller envelope, sealed with red wax. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Dad finally broke the silence. Don't get your hopes up. Probably just another $1 inside. But for the first time that day, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was curiosity, heavy and electric. Grandpa had never been a man of empty gestures. If he'd left me a single dollar and a secret letter, there was a reason. I slid my thumb under the seal. Mom leaned forward. Chloe crossed her arms. Henderson gave a small nod. Inside was a single line, written in that familiar steady script. And when I read it, my stomach dropped. Whatever I thought this was, it was something much, much bigger. I didn't read the note out loud. Not right away. My fingers shook slightly as I folded it closed and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Mom's eyes followed the movement like a hawk tracking prey. Well, she demanded. What does it say? I looked at her. It's private, I said quietly. Her face twitched. Private? Don't be ridiculous, Peter. We're family. Exactly, I replied, my voice steady now. And Grandpa said it's for me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dad snorted, pushing back his chair. Oh, stop being dramatic. It's probably some sentimental nonsense. The old man was losing it at the end. Mr. Henderson raised a hand, calm as ever. Actually, Mr. Whitaker was of sound mind when he signed these documents. He insisted on every word. That seemed to shut Dad up, at least temporarily. But Mom was still glaring at me, her lips pursed tight. Chloe leaned back, twirling her hair with one manicured finger, her tone mock sympathetic. Maybe it's a little note saying how proud he is of you. Or maybe he's apologizing for, well, you know. For what? I asked, though I already knew she'd enjoy spelling it out. For realizing you'd never be me, she said with a fake sweet smile. It's okay, Pete. Some people are just meant to support others. I didn't answer. I stood up, thanked Mr. Henderson, and told him I'd call later. I could hear Dad grumbling something about ungrateful kids as I walked out. The cool air outside felt like a slap. I sat in my car for a while, just staring at the folded paper in my hand. Finally, I unfolded it again. The message was short, just 9 words. The dollar isn't the gift. Look beneath the roots. Beneath the roots. For a moment, I thought he was being poetic, maybe metaphorical. But then I remembered something. The oak tree. The one behind his farmhouse. The one we'd planted together when I was 9. He used to call it our marker. Every year, he'd make me measure how tall it had grown. When I asked him once why it mattered, he said, "Because someday, it'll matter to you more than to me." I didn't understand then, but I did now. I drove straight to the farm. It wasn't far, just an hour from the city, down winding roads lined with old fences and rusted mailboxes. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling and the porch sagging slightly. It had been empty since his passing, though legally, it now belonged to Chloe, at least on paper. The key still worked. Inside, everything was exactly the same. The smell of old wood and tobacco. The dusty bookshelf full of history books. His worn recliner still faced the same window overlooking the oak tree. I stood there for a long moment, then went outside, the letter still in my hand. The oak had grown tall and thick, its roots sprawling under the soil. I walked around it slowly, scanning the ground. There, a small patch near the base where the earth looked disturbed, slightly looser than the rest. My heart began to race. I fetched a shovel from the shed and started digging. After maybe half an hour, the shovel hit something hard. A small metal box. My breath caught. I pulled it out and brushed off the dirt. There was no lock, just a latch. Inside were a few folded documents, yellowed and crisp, and one more note in Grandpa's handwriting. "Peter, if you found this, you've earned it." Everything else was a distraction. You know better than anyone that what's real isn't always what shines. I trust you'll know what to do. Grandpa. Underneath the letter were property deeds, several of them. I scanned the names, my pulse pounding harder with each one. 3 parcels of land, totaling hundreds of acres, spread across the outskirts of town. Not small lots, either. Farmland, forests, one even near a river bend that had been sought after by developers for years. And every single one was signed over to me. Quietly, privately, without my parents' knowledge. I sank down beside the box, my hands trembling. Grandpa hadn't left me $1. He'd left me everything that mattered. But I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. I closed the box, put everything back, and buried it again, just in case. Then I sat on the porch until the sun began to set, thinking. That night, I drove back to my apartment, exhausted but wired, my mind spinning with possibilities. Grandpa had been deliberate. The public humiliation, the dollar, was part of something bigger. He knew my parents' greed. He knew Chloe's entitlement. He wanted them to show their true colors first. And they were already starting to. The next few weeks were tense. Mom called often, pretending to check in. Every call started with fake concern and ended with subtle jabs. "So, Peter, have you found a new job yet?" "I still have my old one, Mom." "Oh, right. The factory thing. Must be nice to have so little stress." Dad chimed in occasionally, usually to criticize. "You should be learning something from your sister. She's launching a brand line now. Candles didn't work, but this new one's solid, essential oils or something." I just nodded along. I didn't bother explaining that Chloe's brand was already floundering again. Grandpa's funeral had sparked her temporary fame online, but it fizzled fast. Still, she acted like she'd inherited the throne. When the local paper published an article about the family estate, technically part of Grandpa's holdings, Chloe gave interviews about her vision for modernization. She posted photos of herself in front of his farmhouse, captioned, "Honoring the legacy with a new beginning." I felt sick. It wasn't even that I wanted the money. I just couldn't stand the erasure of who Grandpa really was. He hated fake grandeur. He built things with his hands, repaired his own tractor at 80 years old, refused to sell his land to corporations no matter how high the offers got. And now, Chloe was using his name to sell overpriced heritage wellness packages. But I stayed quiet, at least for the time being. Then one morning, I got an email from Mr. Henderson. He wanted to meet. When I arrived, he looked both cautious and impressed. "Peter," he said, closing the door behind me. "I assume you found the letter?" I nodded slowly. "And the contents beneath the roots?" I hesitated. "You knew about that?" He smiled faintly. "Your grandfather was meticulous. He told me everything. But he also instructed me not to reveal anything until you'd proven you could handle it." "Handle what exactly?" I asked. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were appraisals and updated records. My jaw slackened when I saw the total value. The land Grandpa left me was worth more than double what Chloe had inherited. I stared at the numbers, then at Henderson. "Why didn't he just put this in the will?" "Because he knew your family," Henderson said simply. "If they thought you had money, they'd come for it. This way you have time. Control. Leverage. Leverage." That word stuck in my head for days. And sure enough, my parents came knocking soon after, figuratively first, then literally. Mom invited me to dinner to reconnect. I almost didn't go, but part of me wanted to see how far this would go. The moment I stepped into their house, I knew it wasn't about reconnecting. The dining table was set with wine glasses and printed brochures. Yes, brochures. Chloe stood there in a crisp, white blazer, smiling like a politician. "Petey," she chirped, "we were just talking about you." Mom clasped her hands together. "Your sister has a wonderful business proposal. We think you could be part of it." I sat down slowly. "Part of what?" Chloe slid one of the brochures over to me. It was titled Whitaker Heritage Retreat, a Family Legacy Experience. I blinked. "What is this?" She leaned forward, excited. "It's a destination retreat. Yoga, meditation, farm-to-table dining, all on Grandpa's property. The land's already mine, so I'll handle ownership. You just help with logistics. You know, construction, maintenance, stuff you're good at." "In other words," I said flatly, "I'd work for you." Chloe smiled wider. "Well, if you want to put it that way. But hey, you'd be part of something meaningful." Dad raised his glass. "You could use a purpose, son. It's not healthy living alone, tinkering with machines." Mom nodded. "And it's the least you can do after everything Chloe's done for this family." I stared at them, feeling that same tightness in my chest as I had at the will reading. The old patterns were back, condescension disguised as kindness, manipulation wrapped in smiles. I stood up. "No, thanks," I said simply. Chloe's smile faltered. "Excuse me. I'm not interested in working for you." Mom's eyes narrowed. "Peter, don't be ungrateful. She's offering you an opportunity." "An opportunity," I repeated, "to build her empire while she takes the credit." Dad slammed his glass down. "Enough of that tone. You'll help your sister, or don't bother showing your face here again." I didn't argue. I just nodded once, turned, and walked out. That was the night I decided I'd had enough. But walking away didn't mean staying silent forever. Grandpa had trusted me with something powerful, something my parents had no idea existed. And as I watched them twist his legacy into something fake, something selfish, I realized exactly what he'd meant by leverage. They thought they'd humiliated me with $1. They had no idea what was coming. It started small, just whispers at first. Friends of the family would mention things that didn't add up. A former farmhand called me one night asking if I'd approved the bulldozer work near the riverbank. I had no idea what he was talking about. "Your sister said you signed off on it," he told me. "Said you two were partners now." I remember sitting there, frozen, the phone pressed to my ear while he described how trucks had rolled in to clear space for cabins. Cabins on Grandpa's land. I thanked him, hung up, and immediately drove out there. The moment I saw the churned-up soil, the tree stumps, and the spray-painted wooden stakes marking Lot A, Lot B, parking, I felt something inside me crack. Chloe had crossed a line, but not just her. There were tire marks all over the property, fresh construction tape tied around fence posts, and a laminated notice nailed to the oak tree itself. My oak tree. Our oak tree. It read, "Whitaker Heritage Retreat, Development in Progress. Project Manager, Chloe Whitaker." I just stood there, my fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned white. She hadn't even called. No message, no warning, nothing. Just bulldozed the one thing Grandpa and I built together. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with cheerfulness. "Hey, Petey. Long time, what's up?" "Don't hey Petey me," I snapped. "What are you doing on the farm?" Silence for a beat. Then a sigh. "Oh, that. You saw it already, huh?" "Already." I nearly laughed. You didn't even ask me. You didn't tell anyone. She clicked her tongue. Relax, Pete. It's just some preliminary groundwork. We're expanding the retreat space. Dad's idea, actually. He said it's time to use the land for something productive. The land isn't yours to do that with, I said quietly. Excuse me. I mean legally, Chloe. You inherited the house and liquid assets, not the property Grandpa bought later. Those weren't in the will. Her tone shifted immediately. Are you seriously pulling that right now? He left me the estate, Peter. That includes everything. No, I said, it doesn't. And you know it doesn't. She laughed. Light, cruel. You really think you can fight me on this? Come on, little brother. Don't embarrass yourself. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. The next day, I drove to Mr. Henderson's office with photos of the property damage. He confirmed what I already knew. The land she was touching wasn't hers. Grandpa had transferred it directly to me through private deeds years earlier. She's trespassing, Peter, Henderson said, frowning. You have every legal right to stop her. I nodded slowly. Not yet. He looked confused. Not yet. She thinks she's invincible, I said. Let her dig deeper. Because if there was one thing I'd learned about my family, it was that greed never stopped halfway. It always wanted more. And the more they took, the easier it would be to expose them later. But what I didn't anticipate was how low they'd go next. A week later, I got a notice in the mail, an official one. A petition to invalidate Grandpa's private transfers. It was filed by none other than my parents. According to the document, they claimed I'd manipulated an elderly man into rewriting his estate. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading the words over and over, my jaw tightening until I could hear my teeth grind. Manipulated. They were accusing me of taking advantage of him, the man they barely visited, the man they mocked for being stuck in the past. The petition included a statement from Chloe, too. She'd sworn, under oath, that Grandpa had intended all assets to belong to the main branch of the family. Meaning her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the dark staring at the ceiling, wondering how the same people who raised me could twist reality so easily. I thought about all the times I'd helped Dad fix his roof, all the weekends I spent cleaning their garage, or bailing Chloe out of her failed ventures. Every memory of goodwill now felt like a bruise. Then came the phone call that broke whatever trust one still had left. Mom. She called late, around 11 p.m. Her voice was softer than usual, almost gentle. Peter, honey, I just wanted to talk. I didn't answer. You know your father's upset about this lawsuit nonsense. We didn't want to take it there, but you forced our hand. By existing? I said quietly. She sighed. Don't be dramatic. You're always so sensitive. Look, you know how these things work. Your grandfather was old, confused. He didn't understand what he was signing. Chloe deserves that land. She's going to make something wonderful out of it. And what about me? You? Oh, Peter. She laughed softly, like she was comforting a child. You've never been interested in business or family matters. You're not built for it. You'd waste that land just like you wasted your chances. This way, it stays in the family. In the family? I repeated, my voice flat. You mean in her hands? She hesitated, then said something that still rings in my ears to this day. Sometimes, the better child needs more to do more. I hung up. I didn't yell, didn't argue. Just quietly ended the call and stared out my window until the sky turned gray. The next morning, I went to the property again. The place looked even worse. Half the field torn up, trenches dug where wildflowers used to grow. Construction trucks were parked everywhere. Workers I didn't recognize moved around like ants, following orders barked by a man in a bright vest. I walked straight to him. Who's in charge here? He looked at me suspiciously. You the surveyor? No, I'm the owner. He frowned. Lady named Chloe Whitaker hired us. She doesn't own this land. He laughed, assuming I was joking. Then you better take it up with her. We've been paid. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to decide whether to shout or just walk away. Instead, I took pictures, everything I could. Then I went home and printed them out. That night, Dad called. He didn't even bother pretending to be civil. You're making a fool of yourself, he said immediately. We already told the lawyers to handle this. You'll drop your nonsense and sign the release form. No. His voice hardened. You think you can fight us? You don't have the money or the spine, Peter. You've always been too soft. Maybe, I said. But you should know something, Dad. Grandpa wasn't confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. "Don't test me, boy," he snapped. "You'll regret it." Then came the click. A week later, the betrayal became complete. I came home from work one afternoon and found my apartment door ajar. Inside, drawers were open, papers scattered, my desk overturned. My stomach dropped as I realized what was missing: the metal box. The one I dug up from beneath the oak tree. The deeds. The letters. Gone. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I checked the locks. No sign of forced entry. Whoever had done this had used a key. My spare was gone too. I drove straight to my parents' house. No plan, just fury. When Mom opened the door, her expression was eerily calm. "Peter," she said, "you shouldn't come here unannounced." "Where is it?" I demanded. "Where's what?" "The box. The deeds." She smiled faintly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Then I heard footsteps behind her. Chloe appeared, holding a mug, dressed in one of those silk robes she wore when she wanted to feel superior. "Looking for something?" she asked, and her tone told me everything. "You broke into my place," I said. She shrugged. "You really should lock your windows." I stepped forward, my pulse pounding. "That's theft, Chloe." "No," Mom interrupted. "It's correction. We're taking back what shouldn't have been yours in the first place." My voice came out quieter than I expected. "You stole from me." Mom didn't flinch. "You stole from your sister's future first." That's when I realized it. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication. They'd planned this. From the will reading to the construction, to the lawsuit, to this. They'd always planned to take everything back. I looked at them both, really looked. Mom with her calm cruelty, Chloe with her smug smile. And behind them, the faint sound of Dad's TV from the living room. Football, as if nothing else in the world mattered. I turned to leave. "Peter," Mom called as I reached the door. "You might as well stop fighting. The lawyers already have everything they need. Just sign the transfer and move on." I didn't answer. But as I walked out into the cold night air, one thought cut through the chaos like a blade. Grandpa had known. He'd seen this coming. And if he'd trusted me with that land, he must have trusted that I'd know how to protect it. The betrayal hurt, yes, but it also clarified something. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about legacy, about truth, about finally ending the cycle of control that had defined my family for decades. And I wasn't going to play nice anymore. For a long time after that night, everything around me felt hollow. I'd always known my family didn't care about fairness, but seeing it this naked, watching them rip the last piece of Grandpa's memory away from me, broke something deeper. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I went to work, fixed machines, nodded through meetings, and drove home to silence. My phone buzzed with missed calls: Mom, Dad, Chloe, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I knew exactly what they wanted. Submission, the kind that came disguised as reconciliation. The box was gone. The original deeds, too. And without those, my leverage was gone. Henderson did his best to reassure me, saying copies existed at the county office, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. My parents had money, connections, and time. I had exhaustion. The worst part wasn't the loss itself. It was the isolation. Friends who once sympathized with me began to fade away, unsure which version of the story to believe. Chloe had gone online again, posting filtered photos in front of the half-finished Whitaker Heritage Retreat. Her captions were perfectly curated, turning Grandpa's dream into something beautiful, carrying on the family legacy with love and purpose. The comments made me sick. Hundreds of strangers called her inspiring, humble, a true visionary. No one knew the truth. They didn't see the lies, the theft, the manipulation. It was all hidden under soft light and fake smiles. Then came the lawsuit hearing. It was early February, gray and wet, and I remember walking into the courthouse with my stomach twisted into knots. My parents were already inside, sitting beside Chloe. They didn't look nervous. They looked comfortable, like they owned the place. Mom even had the nerve to wave when she saw me. During the hearing, their lawyer, a slick man with a rehearsed smirk, laid out their story like a polished play. He painted me as a confused, resentful son who'd taken advantage of an elderly man's declining mental state. He said Grandpa was lonely and easily influenced, that I'd inserted myself into estate matters beyond my authority. I wanted to shout, to tell the judge about the summers I'd spent by Grandpa's side, the hours in his workshop, the conversations about ethics and patience and craftsmanship. But the courtroom wasn't made for emotion. It was made for presentation. and they had all the polish in the world. When my turn came, I spoke plainly. I told the truth. Henderson presented the copies of the deeds, verified and notarized. But as soon as the opposing lawyer began poking holes, why weren't they included in the main will? Why was the box hidden? I could feel the doubt creeping in. The judge didn't make a ruling that day. He said it would require review. But the damage was already done. My parents walked past me on their way out, triumphant. Chloe smiled that practiced smile and whispered, "You really thought you could win, didn't you?" I drove home that night through heavy rain, gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands cramped. When I got to my apartment, I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat there in the dark, soaked and shaking. For the first time in years, I cried. Not the kind of crying that asks for comfort. The quiet, hopeless kind that empties you out. I started to believe maybe they were right. Maybe I was the weak one. The one who tried to do everything right only to end up with nothing. For days, I couldn't eat. I'd wake up with my jaw clenched and a dull ache behind my eyes. Henderson called to check on me, but I barely answered. He said he'd keep fighting, that the truth would surface eventually. But it didn't feel like truth mattered. It never had in my family. They'd always been better at rewriting the story. Then, one evening, I saw something that snapped me out of it. Chloe was on local TV. An interview. She was sitting in the farmhouse, Grandpa's farmhouse, looking poised, radiant, wearing a cream blazer and gold jewelry. Behind her, I could see the oak tree through the window. The reporter was asking about the new development. "Your grandfather must be proud, seeing his land transformed this way." Chloe smiled. "Oh, absolutely. He told me before he passed that he always dreamed of seeing this place flourish. I'm just making that dream real." I felt the blood drain from my face. He never said that. He said the opposite. He said never sell to anyone who speaks in promises. I turned off the TV, sat back, and stared at the ceiling. That's when it hit me. They didn't just take from me. They were rewriting him. His memory, his principles, everything he stood for. And if I let them, he'd be remembered as a man who supported her lies. Something in me hardened that night. The sadness didn't vanish, but it shifted into something sharper, resolve. I wasn't going to fight them with rage or desperation anymore. That never worked. My parents thrived on emotion. It made them stronger. No, I needed to think like Grandpa. Patiently, quietly, strategically. So I started to plan. The first thing I did was visit the farmhouse again, this time late at night when the construction crews were gone. I parked down the road and walked the rest of the way, flashlight in hand. The property looked like a ghost of itself. Half-built cabins, steel frames, and bulldozed earth. But when I got closer to the oak tree, something strange caught my eye. There were still roots exposed from where the soil had been moved. And buried in the mess was something metal. Not large, just the corner of a small box. My heart thudded as I crouched down and dug it out with my hands. It wasn't the same one as before. This one was smaller, rusted, and sealed tight. Inside was a key. A simple brass key with the initials RW etched on it, Grandpa's initials. There was also a note, water-stained but still legible. "If they take what's yours, look where they never think to look." I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But I felt something spark again. A puzzle. A trail. The next morning, I took the key to Henderson. He examined it carefully. "RW," he murmured. "Do you know what it unlocks?" "No," I said. "But I think I need to find out." He nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, Peter," he clearly trusted only you to find it. Over the next few weeks, I kept my distance from everyone. My parents sent another letter through their lawyer, demanding I stop interfering with the retreat project. Chloe, meanwhile, was doing promotional shoots, hosting influencers at the partially finished property, posting quotes about gratitude and legacy. Every photo made my chest ache. Every smile she faked was another reminder that she'd taken everything. I started driving aimlessly after work. Long drives through back roads, places Grandpa and I used to go. I'd park by the river sometimes, just sitting there in the quiet, the key in my pocket, turning it over in my fingers like a habit. Then, one night, I remembered something. When I was a kid, Grandpa had a storage unit in town, an old one, near the rail yard. He kept scrap metal and spare parts there, or so he said. Once, when I asked him about it, he winked and said, "That place holds more than rust, Pete." At the time, I thought he meant sentimental junk. But what if it was something else? The next morning, I went there. The facility was half empty, most of the doors rusted and unlabeled. I walked through the rows until I saw it. Unit 47, faintly marked with RW in fading paint. My hands shook as I tried the key. It slid in perfectly. When the door creaked open, a wave of dust hit me. Inside were boxes, neatly labeled, stacked to the ceiling. Tools, blueprints, folders, even old ledgers. And on the far wall, a large, covered frame leaned against the concrete. I pulled the tarp away and froze. It was a detailed map of the land. Not just Grandpa's property, but everything around it. The boundaries, the underground water systems, the zoning lines. And at the bottom corner, a signature block with the county seal. He hadn't just owned farmland. He'd quietly acquired the mineral rights beneath it. That's when it all clicked. The roots. The beneath. He wasn't just being poetic. He'd hidden something real, something far more valuable than money. I stood there for a long time, my head spinning. Then I laughed, quiet, incredulous laughter that turned into something close to tears. Grandpa had known they'd take the obvious, so he'd buried the real treasure underneath it all. Still, even with that knowledge, I wasn't ready to fight yet. I didn't know how. My parents were still in control of the narrative. I was still the bitter son. And legally, the process could take months, maybe years. So I waited, worked, saved. The world kept moving. Chloe's retreat opened for soft visits. Photos of the cabins started popping up online. Fake rustic, over-designed, soulless. Mom gave interviews, too, always emphasizing family unity. Dad stayed in the background, letting them bask in attention. Meanwhile, I stayed invisible. I started visiting the storage unit quietly, documenting everything, scanning records, organizing files. Piece by piece, I was building something they couldn't see, a foundation of proof, not emotion. But even with the small sense of control returning, I still felt like I was standing at the bottom of a well, looking up at the faintest light. The betrayal had hollowed me out. Nights were the hardest. That's when the voices came back. You'll never win, Peter. You're too soft. She deserves more. Sometimes I'd wake up gripping my phone, mid-draft of a message to Mom that I never sent. Sometimes I'd replay Grandpa's words in my head. Patience is a craftsman's virtue, and try to believe them. Piece by piece, something inside me began to shift from pain to purpose. That spring, something inside me finally began to thaw. The grief was still there, tucked deep behind my ribs, but it no longer paralyzed me. It fueled me. I started each morning early, coffee, a notebook, and my laptop open to the growing folder of files I'd gathered from Grandpa's storage unit. I spent hours cross-referencing deeds, mineral rights, purchase agreements, and maps. What I uncovered was astonishing. Grandpa hadn't just owned a few parcels of land. Over the course of 30 years, he'd quietly acquired overlapping tracts that extended far beyond what anyone thought. Miles of forest, a stream system, and several abandoned quarries registered under a holding company he'd set up decades ago, RW Resources, LLC. The discovery hit me like a second inheritance, one I didn't even know existed. The papers showed that not only did I legally own the farmland Chloe had built on, but I also held the subsurface rights beneath her retreat. In simple terms, she could build all the cabins she wanted, but she couldn't legally claim ownership of what lay under them. That was leverage. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt power shift in my direction. I took time to rebuild myself quietly. I started jogging in the mornings again, something I hadn't done since college. I picked up woodworking, something Grandpa had taught me as a kid, and began restoring old furniture in my garage on weekends. It became my therapy. Every piece I sanded and stained reminded me of how Grandpa worked. Patient, deliberate, never rushing a cut. Meanwhile, I started looking at my career differently too. I'd always worked as a mechanical engineer at a mid-level manufacturing firm, steady, modest, predictable. But for the first time, I saw opportunities everywhere. I had ideas for designs, for efficiency models I'd kept in notebooks for years but never pursued. So I stayed up late, coding simulations and building prototypes, pouring the anger into precision. Within months, one of my designs, a compact irrigation pump system meant for rural areas, caught attention online after I posted a demo video. A small agricultural tech company reached out, interested in licensing it. The deal wasn't huge, but it was enough to give me breathing room. I quit my old job and started my own small consultancy. The timing felt poetic. While my family flaunted their retreat, I was building something real from the ground up, just like Grandpa had. Then something strange happened. Developers started contacting me. Apparently, the region around the farm was becoming valuable. A highway expansion had been approved nearby, and companies were quietly scouting for land with water access and mineral potential. One company sent an email asking about leasing rights for a quarry site listed under RW Resources. My heart jumped. They didn't know it was me. They just saw the LLC. I met with Mr. Henderson immediately. He nearly laughed when he saw the message. "Peter, this is bigger than you think," he said, flipping through the documents. "If you play this right, you could turn what your grandfather left into a long-term income stream. And more importantly, you can make sure your sister's project stays under your legal thumb." That last part mattered, because while I'd been rebuilding, Chloe had been expanding. Her Whitaker Heritage Retreat had gone viral on social media. Influencers were visiting, corporate wellness programs were booking retreats, and magazines were calling her the visionary granddaughter continuing a family legacy. Mom handled PR, Dad managed finances, and they'd built the perfect illusion of success. The truth? The retreat was already bleeding money. I found out when I stumbled across a local contractor's complaint online. Apparently, Chloe had refused to pay for half of the plumbing work, claiming budget discrepancies. Curious, I looked deeper: public business records, debt filings, and unpaid contractor listings. The retreat was surviving on loans and sponsorship deals, not profit. Still, they presented it as an empire. Photo shoots, ribbon cuttings, smiling family portraits in glossy magazines. My parents looked proud again, radiant even. It made my stomach twist, but also sharpened my resolve. Because now, I had something they didn't: proof, time, and ownership of the ground beneath their empire. I started visiting the farm again, this time openly. The construction workers were mostly gone by then, replaced by maintenance crews and landscaping teams. Chloe wasn't there the first few times I came, but word got around quickly that I'd been seen on the property. A week later, I got a call. "Peter." Chloe's voice was ice. "Why are you showing up at my retreat?" "Checking on my land," I said evenly. She laughed bitterly. "Your land? You really need to drop this fantasy before it gets pathetic. You should probably read your lease agreements more carefully," I said. "Might notice something about mineral rights and subterranean claims." There was a pause, just long enough to make me smile. Then she said, "You're bluffing." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you're building a multi-million-dollar business on top of something you don't own." That was the last thing I heard before she hung up. For the next month, the calls from their lawyers started again, this time more polite, less aggressive. They wanted to clarify boundaries and avoid unnecessary escalation. That's when I knew I had them rattled. Henderson advised me not to rush. "Let them sweat," he said. "Greed always trips over itself." So I waited and focused on growth. My business was thriving. By summer, I'd signed 2 new clients and hired an assistant. The prototype I'd sold earlier was being tested for a state grant program. The local paper even featured a short piece about Whitaker Engineering, a small-town success story helping farmers modernize irrigation. I didn't seek attention, but it found me. Funny thing, Mom must have seen it. She texted me one morning for the first time in months. "Mom, saw your little article. Glad you're finally doing something useful. Maybe now you can contribute to the family business again." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Me? You mean the one built on my land?" She didn't respond. Later that week, I got a message from Chloe herself. It was a single line, no greeting. "Chloe, you're not going to win, Peter. You never do." But she was wrong. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was building something sustainable, something real. And for once, my life didn't revolve around their approval or attention. Still, I knew it wasn't over. Their pride wouldn't let them back down. That autumn, I decided to take things further. I hired a geological surveyor to officially document the underground assets tied to my mineral rights. What they found confirmed everything: valuable stone deposits, high-quality clay, and a spring system that could supply water for decades. The report was irrefutable. When I told Henderson, he smiled like a man watching a chess match unfold exactly as planned. "Do you realize what this means?" he said. "If they continue construction or profit from this land without your permission, they're violating property law." "Then we'll wait," I said. And we did. Weeks passed. The retreat kept operating, oblivious to the legal trap beneath it. Guests arrived. Photos circulated. And then, one evening, a friend sent me a video from social media. an influencer live streaming at the retreat. In the background, I could clearly see one of the cabins built right over the mapped spring. That was it. The moment of proof. I contacted Henderson that night. We filed an injunction. It wasn't an act of revenge, it was justice. Still, as the case moved forward, I kept my distance emotionally. I didn't announce it, didn't gloat. I just kept working, quietly thriving, while the cracks in their empire widened. Contractors demanded payment. The bank reduced their credit line. Local rumors started spreading that the Whitaker retreat was built on disputed land. For once, I didn't need to defend myself. The truth was defending me. One morning, months later, I visited the oak tree again. It was colder then, leaves falling, ground damp with frost. I placed my hand on the bark, feeling the rough grooves beneath my fingers. The tree had grown thicker, stronger. It had survived storms, drought, time, and now greed. I remember whispering, "I'm getting there, Grandpa." Because I was. My business had doubled in income by winter. My apartment had become a small home. I'd made new friends, real ones, people who didn't see me as the quiet failure of the family, but as someone who built something honest. And yet, deep down, I knew there was still one thing left undone. The retreat, the family, the illusion. They hadn't learned anything yet. Not Mom with her sharp smiles, not Dad with his empty pride, not Chloe with her endless need to prove she was chosen. And soon enough, I realized I wouldn't have to confront them myself. The confrontation would come to me. It always did. Winter came early that year. The air had that sharp, metallic chill that made every sound echo farther than it should, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread the quiet that came with it. My life had changed so much since the last time I'd stood on that land. I wasn't the uncertain, hesitant son anymore, the one who bit his tongue and waited for scraps of respect. I was calm, patient, deliberate. I finally understood what Grandpa meant when he said, "Don't shout when you can let silence do the heavy lifting." By December, my company had grown beyond what I ever expected. The irrigation system I designed was now being tested for municipal use, and I'd landed a government contract to retrofit outdated rural equipment. It was modest but steady, enough to hire 2 more employees and move into a small office on the edge of town. The same town where the Whitaker Heritage Retreat sat gleaming like a false crown. That retreat had become a full-blown spectacle. A new website, a rebranding campaign, and a flurry of press coverage had turned Chloe into a minor celebrity. She'd started giving TED-style talks about family values and perseverance. I didn't know whether to laugh or to be impressed at her ability to twist every truth into a personal victory. Mom managed the books, Dad handled public relations, and together, they'd convinced half the county that the Whitakers were the picture of harmony. But beneath the polished facade, the cracks were widening. I knew it. Henderson sent me regular updates on the injunction. The legal gears turned slowly, but they turned. Chloe had responded with her typical arrogance, counterclaims, public denials, and statements about paperwork confusion. But the evidence was irrefutable. The mineral rights, the water source, the zoning violations, all of it pointed to one conclusion. They were standing on property they didn't own and drawing profits from it. Still, I didn't want to destroy them outright. Not yet. I wanted them to walk into their own downfall, one careful step at a time. That's when I met Elena. She was a journalist working for a regional magazine that covered business development in rural communities. She reached out to me after seeing my company featured in an industry newsletter. "You seem to be doing something different," she said during our first meeting over coffee. "Most people build things for scale. You're building for purpose." I didn't expect it to go anywhere beyond a short feature about local innovation, but as we talked, her curiosity deepened. She asked about my family's history with the land, about my grandfather, about how I got into engineering. I hesitated to bring up the retreat, but when she mentioned she'd already been researching the new luxury development near Whitaker Lake, I realized fate had just handed me something valuable. "They've built over a groundwater source," I said carefully. "One that's protected under environmental zoning. And they're not supposed to be there." Her pen froze mid-sentence. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." She didn't print it immediately. Instead, she started digging. Over the next few weeks, Elena uncovered a trail of discrepancies. Construction permits issued under false claims, environmental clearances that were either missing or rushed, and a pattern of payments from the retreat to county officials that didn't quite line up. She was cautious, thorough, methodical. One night, she called me, her voice tight with excitement. "Peter, do you know how deep this goes?" "I have a guess," I said. "They've been rerouting part of the water system, your water system, to feed their so-called wellness spas. And the local board approved it under your grandfather's old company name. They forged authorization papers." I sat back in my chair, stunned but not surprised. Forgery. Of course. They'd already broken into my apartment, stolen deeds, and fabricated a narrative in court. Why not steal my name too? "Can you prove it?" I asked. "I can," she said. "But if I publish, it's going to be a firestorm. Are you ready for that?" I paused, thinking about Grandpa, about all the years of swallowing my anger. "Yeah," I said finally. "I've been ready for a long time." While she prepared her piece, I worked on my own front. Henderson and I began restructuring the legal ownership of everything under RW Resources LLC. We shifted the assets into a trust, one that I controlled exclusively. The new trust had clauses that would automatically trigger repossession if any of the land or resources were used commercially without a valid lease. That meant Chloe's retreat was now sitting on a ticking time bomb. I didn't stop there. I hired an independent environmental consultant, someone known for being brutally honest and unimpressed by corporate money. Her inspection confirmed what Elena had suspected. The retreat's drainage system was leaking contaminants into the water supply. Not enough to be lethal, but enough to violate environmental codes. The irony was delicious. Chloe had built her empire on sustainability and healing. Now, the very ground beneath her was turning against her because she'd poisoned it. I kept everything quiet, though. Henderson wanted to file immediately, but I told him to wait. "They're too proud to back down," I said. "Let them build higher. The fall will be cleaner." Meanwhile, Chloe continued her PR crusade. She hosted gala dinners at the retreat, invited influencers, and even filmed an interview for a national business channel. I watched it one night, half out of morbid curiosity. She sat there in a white suit, smiling into the camera, saying things like, "This retreat isn't about money. It's about honoring my grandfather's memory and reconnecting people with nature." When the interviewer asked about her family, she smiled even wider. "My parents have always supported me. My brother? He's doing his own thing. I think he's still finding his path." That line hit harder than I expected. Still finding his path. That's what Mom used to tell relatives when I was 25 and fixing engines out of a garage. To her, my worth had always been potential that never bloomed. I didn't realize it until later, but that line, her public dismissal, became the final push I needed. I spent the next few weeks refining my next move. Henderson drew up a series of quiet notices, formal demands for cessation of commercial activity on my land. We didn't deliver them yet. We were waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came in early spring, when the retreat announced its biggest event yet, the Whitaker Legacy Weekend, a luxury 3-day retreat celebrating family, roots, and resilience. It would feature wellness workshops, fine dining, and a keynote speech by Chloe herself. Tickets were $3,000 per guest and sold out in days. Elena called me the day after the announcement. "You know this is the perfect timing, right?" "Oh, I know," I said. Her article was already complete, an exposé detailing the environmental violations, the false permits, and the illegal use of private property. But I asked her to hold it until the day of the event. She hesitated, but when I explained why, she understood. "Let them put on the show first," I said. "Then we pull the curtain." During those weeks leading up to it, I prepared everything. Copies of the trust documents, environmental reports, injunction orders, and photographic proof. Henderson coordinated quietly with the county environmental office and a few journalists he trusted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to their cruelty. I was ahead of it. Still, I couldn't help but think about how strange it felt. Revenge, for all its fire, isn't loud. It's patient. It's methodical. It's built like a bridge, piece by piece, until one day the whole structure carries its own weight. The night before the Legacy Weekend, I drove out to the farm again. It was quiet except for the hum of generators. The cabins glowed softly under string lights, guests checking in, staff preparing decorations. From a distance, it almost looked beautiful. But I knew what it really was, a facade built on theft, on ego, on betrayal. I stood under the oak tree for a long time. The moonlight filtered through the branches, silvering the ground beneath my feet. I whispered, "Tomorrow, they'll finally see you, Grandpa. Not their version you." When I drove away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Everything was in motion. Elena had scheduled her article to go live at 9 a.m. sharp, just as Chloe would begin her speech. The environmental report would reach the county board an hour later, triggering an immediate inspection. And the cease and desist order, signed, sealed, and stamped, was sitting in Henderson's briefcase, ready to be hand-delivered during the event itself. It was all timed perfectly. I didn't plan to attend the retreat, but something in me wanted to see it, just once, to witness the moment the walls cracked. So I made a decision. The next morning, I'd walk right into their kingdom, quietly, calmly, like the ghost of the man they'd erased. And by the time I left, the empire they built on lies would be nothing but dust beneath the roots. The morning of the Legacy weekend felt impossibly ordinary. Blue sky, crisp air, string lights still drooping from the eaves like last night's confetti. I sat in my car about a half-mile down the lane and watched the place through the windshield for a long time. From a distance, it looked like the joyful scene Chloe wanted everyone to see. Couples laughing on the lawn, servers moving silently with trays, a harpist somewhere under an awning. Close up, it was the same set of rehearsed motions I'd seen on social media. The choreography of a story someone wanted you to believe. I breathed in, folded my hands in my lap, and felt the weirdest peace. My part of the plan had long since stopped being about feelings. It was about facts. And facts, when presented clearly, had a way of bending the world toward the truth. At 9 on the dot, Elena's piece went live. I didn't read it on my phone like a normal person would. I watched the live stream feed from the retreat instead. 1,000 people were logged in. Chloe stood on a small stage beneath a banner that read, "Whitaker Legacy Weekend," rooted in purpose. She was radiant, impossibly collected, and spoke about heritage, stewardship, and intentional living. The camera pulled back to show the audience, the tables, the branded tote bags with a minimalist oak logo. It was beautiful theater. Then Elena's headline scrolled across my screen. Whitaker Retreat built on disputed land. Allegations of forged permits and environmental violations surface. The article was clean and precise. No hyperbole, just documents, names, dates. It linked to scanned copies of permits, a contractor's unpaid invoices, and the environmental report showing contaminated runoff into the tributary that fed the spring. It quoted the county clerk about missing authorizations and included a short statement from Henderson indicating that an injunction request had been filed. The piece went viral within minutes, shared, screenshot, reposted, and the live stream feed at the retreat began to fill with rapid-fire comments. Is this true? Did she really forge permits? What about the water? Back at the site, Chloe's smile faltered. For the first time that morning, I saw the human beneath the polish, confusion, then an attempt at composure, then a flash of anger. She glanced toward the stage manager, who whispered something and then moved to check the feed on a side monitor. The murmurs in the crowd swelled. Phones came out. Guests who had paid thousands for a healing weekend were suddenly watching a scandal unfurl on their screens. A woman at a front table stood up and walked toward the stage as if to demand answers. Elena's article was only the start. 10 minutes later, the county environmental office released a short statement acknowledging that it had received a formal complaint and would dispatch inspectors immediately. An hour after that, a lawyer representing a group of contractors filed public complaints about unpaid work, attaching the same invoices Elena had uncovered. Social feeds went from admiration to suspicion. The retreat's hashtag tanked. I walked through the gate like a ghost. Staff eyed me with polite confusion, someone they recognized as the little brother who weirdly never left town. And I let them think whatever they liked. I didn't want attention. I wanted a moment, and then the facts to land where they would. When I stepped onto the lawn, I could feel the temperature shift. Conversation stalled. Eyes tracked me. Chloe saw me almost at the same time, and her face, for a flash, went entirely white. She lifted a hand to her earpiece and spoke into it in a low, hurried voice. I watched her try to be anchored by performance, the artifice faltering at the edges. Henderson arrived quietly, as he always did, calm, understated, the sort of man who radiates competence. He didn't need to do anything dramatic. He handed a folder to a county inspector who had just arrived, then to the retreat manager, and then to the retreat's lawyer. Elena sat in the front row like a soldier who had done her reconnaissance and returned with the maps. Cameras now swarmed the lawn, local stations, as well as a few national outlets that had picked up the story. The event organizer tried to keep the program going. That was their training. Don't give the rumor space to grow. But you can't keep a wound covered forever. Chloe mounted the stage for her keynote anyway, because of course she did. She cleared her throat and attempted to spin the narrative. We are learning of allegations, and we're cooperating fully, she said, the political cadence practiced and precise. But the microphone crackled, the questions from the crowd got louder, and a contractor, whose name I later learned was Miguel, stood up in the back and shouted, "You owe my crew 2 months' pay." The man's voice cut through the canned music. The crowd turned. The hush became a wave. That was when the county inspector spoke into his radio. Within minutes, men in uniforms, environmental officers, not armed police, but official enough, walked across the grass to stand beside the oak. They did not ask for permission. They had authority. The head inspector scanned the site slowly, then called for a halt on the event pending immediate sampling. The band that had been tuning their instruments packed up without ceremony. Guests were asked politely but firmly to stay put as the county documented evidence. The retreat's lawyer began to mutter about injunction timelines, but Henderson's folder had already been entered into the official record. The moment the officers pinned a stop work notice to a visible support post near the stage, the atmosphere snapped from stage joy to raw anxiety. Guests stood, some looking indignant and demanding refunds, others visibly shaken. A man at a table turned to the person next to him and said, "But I brought my mother here for her birthday. What do we do?" Two influencers who had been live streaming started screaming into their phones about being scammed, and the audio feed amplified the chaos. Chloe's carefully curated life started to fray at the seams in real time. What I remember most clearly is her eyes finding me from the stage. For months, I'd imagined the moment in different ways: confrontations, speeches, gloating. In person, it was quieter and more horrifying for her. She looked like a child caught after stealing a cookie, except the jar was the size of an estate, and the cookie crumbs were trailings of forged signatures and unpaid invoices. She mouthed something, but the microphone didn't pick it up. She tried to smile, and the smile broke somewhere in the muscles of her face. Mom appeared at her side, moving like someone reaching for a script that had been torn in half. Dad, being Dad, was gone. I later learned he'd retreated to the study where he'd always felt safe, where he could pretend nothing outside his immediate control had changed. It was the literal and spiritual distance he'd always preferred. Henderson stepped forward when the retreat's lawyer attempted to argue jurisdiction and legality. He spoke softly but firmly, presenting the maps, the trust paperwork, the environmental samples that Elena had facilitated, and the chain of custody documents. He didn't yell. There was no triumphant monologue. He laid out truths like building blocks. The county officials nodded, took his copies, and began the administrative process that would freeze operations and require immediate remediation. That's when the real machinery of accountability began to whir. Chloe's PR team tried to spin flash statements about misunderstandings and good faith and temporary halts to ensure safety. But the contractors circled like wolves who smelled blood. Miguel approached the stage again and, this time, addressed Chloe directly. "You told us you'd pay when you got the next round of sponsorship money," he said. "We paid men who trusted us. We'll sue if you don't. My kids have mouths too." The words landed heavy. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Money conversations never looked pretty in public. The live feed exploded. Comments scrolled so fast it was hard to read anything. Someone clipped a segment and uploaded it to a community forum where people began connecting pieces. An invoice here, a scan permit there, a screenshot of Chloe's earlier social posts about buying local juxtaposed with a contractor's claim of subpar materials paid by the retreat. People started calling out sponsors, asking them to distance themselves. Sponsors, spooked, issued tepid statements within the hour that they were reviewing their relationships. The retreat's booking engine, which had opened up a few weeks earlier for an expansion program, began to show cancellations. Through all of it, I stood near the oak. I could feel the weight of everything my grandfather had hidden down there and the irony that his quiet plan had not been about vengeance so much as clarity, leaving me the means to force truth into bright sunlight. I didn't yell. I didn't clap. I just watched. I watched Chloe, watched Mom trying to pull strings with an increasingly panicked staff, watched the legal and environmental wheels grinding into action. And then, right as Chloe opened her mouth to say something, an attempt at a heartfelt apology, perhaps, or an insistence that this was all a misunderstanding, the PA system cut. Not because of theatrics, but because the power had been disconnected at the main breaker. Someone had tripped it to keep the equipment from interfering with the county's monitoring devices. Nightlight cameras continued to roll, but the stage lights died and the crowd was cast in natural daylight. Chloe froze, one hand raised like she might physically hold the words in. The microphone in front of her squeaked and went dead. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. The guests murmured. Phones lifted again to capture the tableau. Mom's face tightened into a mask. The retreat's lawyer walked forward, mouth-forming words that did not reach beyond the first syllable before a contractor started shouting accusations at him. The scene spiraled. Henderson walked up beside me and rested a hand lightly on my shoulder, just enough contact to say, "It's working." Elena was already on her phone, updating the newsroom with video clips. The county inspector called for photography, every click a digital hammer. A dozen messages buzzed across my own phone, notes of support, offers of legal help, calls from people who wanted to turn what happened into something that would stick. I answered none of them. I wanted to remain in that small window of stillness, the part of revenge where the mechanism you built actually functioned the way you expected it to. Then, as if the timeline needed an exclamation point, a police car rolled up the lane. Not because I'd called them, Henderson assured me we hadn't, but because someone had called 911 reporting a disturbance, and, with the news now national breaking on social feeds, the county had requested uniformed officers for crowd control and safety. The officers stepped from the cruiser with an efficient calm, scanning the crowd, verifying IDs, and issuing orders in low, clipped voices. Chloe's expression folded in on itself, caught between pride and panic. She looked at Dad, who still stayed inside, then at Mom, who was now urgently whispering into a phone. She looked at the oak, as if in some private plea, and then at me. Her gaze held a question. How did you have the nerve? And in it, something else, too. A dawning recognition that whatever had been built was not going to be easily salvaged. The sound of a distant helicopter, news chopper, probably, muffled from the sky, and the world narrowed into the present. Cameras, officers, contractors demanding payment, sponsors asking questions, an environmental team collecting samples, guests arguing about refunds, Chloe on a stage in the dark. The setup I'd orchestrated was collapsing around them, carefully and inevitably. I took a breath and, with a deliberate slowness I'd learned from Grandpa's workshop, walked toward the stage. People shifted to let me pass. When I reached the edge, someone in the crowd, an older man who had been a neighbor years back, grabbed my forearm and squeezed, eyes wet. "You did right by him," he said, and then he was gone into the throng. I climbed the few steps onto the wooden platform and stood beside Chloe. She turned her head to me, mouth opening to say something. Apology, accusation, anything. And then the mic crackled to life again for a single second. A thin, static-filled voice came through, not mine, not hers, but the voice of the county inspector. Under Section 12B, operations are ceased immediately. Any further activity on these grounds may be subject to civil and criminal enforcement. For a heartbeat the world held, as if the air itself was measuring the moment. Then the live feeds multiplied and the crowd surged with questions. Chloe's face, painted for cameras and built for rehearsals, finally showed the rawness of someone whose script had been taken. She looked at me one last time, and there it was, an expression that had nothing to do with performance. It was fear. I opened my mouth. I had 100 possible things to say, short, sharp statements that would make headlines, long monologues that would take pleasure in detail. Instead, I said the one thing that felt most honest, and I didn't shout it. I simply said, "You were always welcome to the truth. You chose differently." Her lips quivered. She looked like she might speak, but at that moment a swarm of people pushed forward, reporters, guests, activists, and county staff, and the platform became a small island surrounded by noise. The helicopter's thump grew louder. Camera lights strobed. Someone yelled that the live stream had been clipped and was already reposted across platforms under new titles. Then, as authorities began to move the crowd and the retreat staff tried to salvage what they could, something shifted at the far edge of the property. A truck idled near a line of trailers. Men in suits I didn't recognize stepped out and were heading toward the farmhouse with an urgency that suggested they weren't here for PR. I saw Dad's outline at the farmhouse window. He had finally come outside, but by then the scene was a moving thing, alive with consequences. I didn't follow Dad's movement. Instead, I stayed on the stage, feeling absurdly calm. The oak tree behind me swayed, indifferent and ancient. The wind carried a faint scent of turned earth and cedar and something else. Maybe the faint bleach of sanitizer used to prepare a wellness corner. The irony made me smile despite everything. And then, in the middle of the noise, I heard a single voice call my name from the crowd. It was soft, shaky. Mom. She sounded different than she had in all the years of condescension. Small, human, asking for a lifeline she had no right to expect. She stood half-hidden by a cluster of guests and cameras, and for a second I considered walking over, making a scene of reconciliation, offering grace. The part of me that had once wanted nothing more than their approval stirred. But I didn't move. The helicopters circled, the county moved in to secure samples, and the legal teams circled like vultures and saints at once. Chloe's empire was collapsing with methodical cruelty and public shame. Contractors demanded bank numbers, sponsors issued statements, guests filed for refunds. Elena's article had ripped open a wound, and the wound was now being disinfected in public. At that precise, loud, chaotic moment, the moment when truth had begun to bend the world toward consequence, someone from the county inspection team approached me and handed me a small slip of paper. It was terse, typed. "We need you to come with us to the main office. There's a statement you should give about chain of custody and your role in ownership." The words were mundane and bureaucratic, but the implication was huge. My involvement had become official. I looked at the oak, at the ruined cabins, at the crowd, and then back to the slip. My breath fogged in the cold air. I folded the paper into my pocket and nodded. As I turned to follow the inspector, Chloe's voice rose in a wavering, barely coherent plea. "Peter, please, don't." The sentence broke into a sob. The crowd shifted again, and the cameras found Chloe's face, tears and mascara streaking down, a human breaking in real time on the stage she had built. I walked past her without looking back. There were still pieces to be put in place, legal filings to finalize, remediation plans to force, public statements to manage. There would be lawyers screaming and PR men spinning, and my parents pressing every lever they had to control the narrative. There would be nights of restless plotting, and there would be the quiet aftermath of what we'd done to each other. But for the first time in years, the scale had tipped enough that I could see a pathway, messy, legal, and painfully slow, away from the humiliation they'd laid on me. I felt lighter and more resolute than I had any right to feel. I reached the county vehicle and slid into the passenger seat. The inspector shut the door, glanced at me without malice, and said, "We'll need a statement, Mr. Whitaker. The public will want the truth." His voice was professional, not triumphant. I nodded and looked one last time at the oak through the rear window, its silhouette stark against the autumn sky. As the car pulled away, cameras still rolling, I thought of Grandpa's handwriting in that little envelope I'd found months ago, the quiet instruction to look beneath the roots. I thought of the patience it had taken to get to this hour, the small, bitter steps that had all accumulated into this moment. I felt the satisfaction of a slow plan working, but I also felt a weight settle on me, the knowledge that this was not the end. Because for all that had collapsed today, there were consequences that had yet to arrive, financial entanglements, battered relationships, and a family that would not surrender quietly. I knew very well that the most serious blows were often the ones delivered in courtrooms and in quiet conversations far from the cameras. We drove away from the property, the crowd shrinking in the distance, the oak left like a silent judge. My phone buzzed once, Elena's name flashing. She'd sent a single line. "It's live. You did it." I put the phone away and looked out the window as the retreat disappeared behind a stand of trees. The car moved down the lane, and for the first time in a long time, something inside me uncoiled. But the moment the county vehicle turned onto the highway, my phone vibrated again, this time with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. The voice on the other end was low and clipped, Mr. Whitaker, this is Agent Fisher with the state attorney's office. We need to talk. There's been a development regarding your grandfather's corporate filings. Can you come in? It took months for the noise to settle, and when it did, the silence was even louder. The county's report came first, dry, factual, and devastating. It confirmed everything: illegal construction over protected waterways, forged environmental permits, unpaid labor, and unauthorized commercial activity on privately held mineral land. The words were clinical, but their impact was lethal. Within days, the Whitaker Heritage Retreat was shut down indefinitely. The morning after the ruling, I drove past the entrance. The banner was gone. The sign that once read, "Rooted in Purpose," lay half-buried in mud, flapping weakly in the wind. The cabins stood empty, their paint already fading under spring rain. Weeds had begun to crawl up the wooden stairs, nature reclaiming what greed had stolen. It felt poetic, quiet, brutal justice. But it was only the beginning. The lawsuits followed like vultures. Contractors sued for unpaid wages. Guests demanded refunds. Environmental agencies levied fines so steep they could have bankrupted a small corporation. Sponsors pulled out, each issuing their sterile public statements about values misalignment. And through it all, Chloe kept posting for as long as she could, trying to salvage the illusion. She uploaded teary videos about misunderstandings and bureaucratic sabotage, but every word made her look more desperate. People stopped believing her. Then they started mocking her. Memes, parodies, hashtags. Her name turned from luxury to liability overnight. Mom disappeared from social media entirely. I heard through neighbors that she stopped leaving the house. The woman who once loved dinner parties and public praise couldn't face a grocery store without whispers following her. Dad, ever the coward, spent his days meeting with lawyers who charged him thousands to tell him what he already knew. There was no way out. Their empire was gone. But even as I watched it crumble, part of me felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but exhaustion. The kind that goes bone deep after years of holding your breath. Grandpa used to say revenge was like carving wood. Too much pressure, and the whole thing splinters. I finally understood what he meant. Still, I couldn't walk away just yet. 2 weeks later, I was called to testify before the state attorney's office. Agent Fisher, the same one who'd called me the day of the retreat's collapse, met me in a stark conference room. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of my grandfather's corporate filings and several newer documents I'd never seen before. Your grandfather was meticulous, Fisher said. He structured everything legally, but we've discovered someone's been falsifying signatures on those filings for years. Someone tried to re-register his LLC under another name right after his death. I didn't even need to guess who. Can we prove who did it? I asked. Fisher nodded. We can. There's a digital paper trail, IP addresses, timestamps, payments for expedited processing. It all points to your sister. He explained that Chloe had attempted to quietly seize control of RW Resources LLC, my grandfather's old holding company, after his death. Her plan had been to absorb its assets under her retreat's parent organization. If she'd succeeded, she would have gained ownership of everything: land, mineral rights, and even residual profits from my grandfather's investments. The only thing that stopped her was Henderson's legal diligence. When Fisher finished, he leaned back in his chair. The forgery alone is enough for felony charges, he said. But it's your decision whether we pursue them. For a long time, I didn't answer. I stared at the folder, the neatly typed evidence of what my family had become. Pressing charges meant destroying any last trace of them. No more polite holidays, no more calls, no more pretending there was ever love in the first place. It would be permanent. But then I remembered the look on Chloe's face that day. The smirk, the entitlement, the complete absence of remorse. I remembered Mom's words. Sometimes, the better child needs more to do more. I looked up. Do it, I said. All of it. He nodded once. We'll move forward. News of the charges broke within a week. Fraud, forgery, environmental misconduct, tax evasion. The headlines spread like wildfire. Chloe was arrested at her condo in front of cameras. Her mugshot, the same face that once sold wellness and luxury, became the symbol of greed's downfall. Mom tried to claim ignorance, but the investigation revealed she'd co-signed several fraudulent checks. Dad wasn't charged, but the IRS came for him anyway. By the end of the summer, everything they owned was gone, seized, sold, or liquidated to cover legal penalties. Their home went first. The cars followed. Even the family heirlooms, mom's china, dad's coin collection, were auctioned off. I didn't go to the sentencing hearing, but Henderson did. He told me afterward that Chloe cried the entire time, not from guilt, but disbelief. She kept asking why, he said quietly, as if it was happening to her, not because of her. Mom refused to speak. Dad, apparently, sat there staring straight ahead, jaw clenched, like a man who couldn't decide whether to be angry or ashamed. When the judge handed down the sentence, 2 years in prison for Chloe, probation and restitution for Mom, the courtroom fell silent. Henderson said the only sound was the echo of the gavel. I thought I'd feel joy, vindication, something cinematic. But when he told me, I just nodded. It wasn't happiness I felt, it was peace. A deep, quiet kind of peace, the kind that doesn't cheer or shout, just breathes. In the months that followed, I rebuilt the property the way it should have been. The retreat cabins were torn down under county supervision, and the land was restored to its natural state. The oak tree stood untouched, towering over the fields like an old sentinel. I kept the farmhouse too, but not as a shrine, as a workshop. Every Saturday, I drove out there, brewed coffee on the porch, and worked with my hands like Grandpa taught me. Sometimes I repaired old furniture. Sometimes I just sat beneath the tree with a notebook. The land was quiet again, honest again. One evening, near the end of autumn, I found a letter tucked behind a drawer in Grandpa's workbench. It was addressed simply, for when the noise ends. The handwriting was shaky, written late in his life, but the words were unmistakably his. If you're reading this, Peter, then you already know what I always hoped you would. That integrity takes longer to build than money, but it lasts longer, too. I never wanted to punish your father or your sister. I just wanted to show you that truth doesn't need to shout to win. Let the land remind you of that. I folded the letter and sat there for a while, the sound of the wind threading through the branches. The sun dipped low, lighting the fields in gold. I realized then that revenge hadn't been the point. It was accountability. A reckoning that began long before I was even old enough to see it coming. Later, I placed the letter in a small frame and hung it by the door. Every time I walked into the farmhouse, it greeted me like a quiet compass. Months passed. My business flourished. I started teaching local students about sustainable design. Kids who reminded me of myself, hungry to build something real. The farmhouse became a community workspace. People came to learn carpentry, engineering, restoration. It wasn't about money. It was about legacy, the kind that doesn't fit in bank accounts. As for my parents, I never saw them again. They moved to another state after the house was sold, living in a small apartment near a strip mall. Henderson once told me Dad still refuses to say my name. Mom, apparently, sends letters sometimes, but I never open them. Chloe's release made headlines a year later, but the world had moved on. The wellness industry she'd thrived and had replaced her with a new face, a new name, a new lie. She tried to reach out once, a handwritten note left at my office. I read it standing by my desk, then tore it in half and threw it away. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about reopening doors. It's about closing them gently and walking away without bitterness. The last time I visited the farmhouse, the oak was shedding its leaves again. They fell in slow spirals, blanketing the earth. I placed my hand on the trunk, feeling the rough bark beneath my fingers. Somewhere deep below, the roots ran strong, unseen but unbreakable. That's when I understood what Grandpa had meant all along. The dollar wasn't the gift. The letter wasn't the treasure. The land wasn't even the point. It was the lesson. What's buried beneath the roots always outlives the ones who tried to cut it down. I looked out across the fields, at the horizon where the sun dipped low and the farmhouse lights glowed faintly through the trees. The air smelled like soil and pine and rain. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free.